burglar from my house is because a bloke in Preston wearing a multicoloured helmet.
I know. James, can I add to your further bit now? Today, right this moment today, Boris Johnson he's going to see some police recruits. You know, he's doing the usual PR stunt with some police recruits, and he's going to a violent reduction unit, and he's going to get his photo up. So I'm sure by tomorrow it'll be in the Daily Mail or whatever, Telegraph. But that's ironic because, like I said, the Conservative Party was the party of law and order, and most police officers now believe it's the party of crime and disorder. Having Theresa May and the Conservatives in charge, it was like having a mafia run the police in this country. It's like Theresa May was the equivalent of Al Capone. She's done so much damage to policing, and she's done so much
Why? She wouldn't. This is the bit that slightly confuses me, and I'm often criticised for being too kind and generous to these politicians. But why? I can't believe they did it knowingly. It's like when Johnson cut fire stations, and I used to say, but he lives here. What if his house catches fire? And part of the answer to that is if you live in a wealthy part of town, then you're considerably, measurably, demonstrably less likely to be a victim of death by fire because standards are higher, safety, health and safety, red tape that they're also against. There's loads more red tape in wealthier areas that protects us from those sort of tragedies and problems. But what was Theresa May thinking in a generous analysis, Colin, in a generous analysis?
I don't know. I mean, it's widely known that she hates the police.
Save money. You can't accuse her of hating the police. No one. I mean, it's not like she's a black 15-year-old boy who gets stopped and searched 14 times a week, is it? I mean, why would she hate the police?
I have no idea. You'd have to ask. Next time she comes and ask her.
Yeah, don't hold your breath.
No one's ever going to ask it. No one's ever asked the question. But I still feel that most Conservative voters, they have no use for public services because, look, they send their kids to private schools, so they don't care about education. They go private healthcare, so
the numbers don't support that, mate. You've got about 9% of the country doing private education, and even less doing private health. So it doesn't stand up, and they don't have private police forces. These people are furious about coppers wearing helmets or taking the knee.
Yes, but
they don't have private health or private education. They're just silly.
I was going to get to the point. Most of they live in the best parts of the country. They live in the best parts of.
What about the Red Wall, Colin? What about the Red Wall? That was supposed to be all about people living in some of the poorest parts of the country, convinced that the Conservatives were on their side.
Well, the part. Obviously, you know, I'm up north now. Those Red Wall parts are. And I wouldn't call
this woke stuff plays a lot better in your part of the world than it does in the leafy suburbs where I hang out, and where actually the demographics are changing. They're not traditional nailed-on Conservative constituencies anymore. But I mean, lots of food for thought. How do actual coppers feel about this? If you're there, underfunded, understaffed, under-resourced, desperately pleading for more numbers, more bodies, and the newspapers and the politicians are saying, "Oh yes, you're all so woke." They're blaming you, or at least a tiny proportion of you who get caught doing a lambada at a street festival or wearing a multicoloured hat at a pride march. It beggars belief. But the question of how it works is, of course, a question for the ages. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. The time is 10:30. The number you need is 0345 6060 973. What is woke policing? Have a go at that. Because it's been bandied around now all the time. The examples that they have can be counted on the fingers of one hand. What is it? What is it? And explain to me how it can possibly have had an impact on burglary investigation success rates. 0345. It's as if they're asking you to believe that a bloke is on a Blues and Twos 999 call to a burglary, and then he decides to stop on the way and take the knee at a Black Lives Matter protest or start doing the lambada at a street festival. He's on his way to an actual crime scene, and instead of going there and investigating it, he decides to, I don't know, put on a multicoloured helmet and talk about how the police used to actually be charged with investigating homosexuals and criminalising and imprisoning them, but now the world has changed. It's probably quite a good use of the occasional copper's time to point out that the world has changed. We're a very different organisation now. But what is woke policing, and how the hell can people be falling for it as a rhetorical device to let the government off the consequences of their own political choices? It's 10:31. Lottie Morley is here with your headlines. 10:35 is the time. I'm surprised how cross I am today because, theoretically, it's not the most enraging issue in front of us. But underpinning an awful lot of our time together for the last 6 years has been the question of what are they going to set fire to next? What are they going to wreck next? They've succeeded on Brexit, this curious alliance of secretly funded think tanks, incredibly biased right-wing media, sycophantic politicians, client journalists, shills from lobby groups. They set fire to the membership of the European Union. You can see how stupid that was, how insane that was, in order to allow a tiny number of people make a huge amount of money. What are they going to set fire to next? And I thought the NHS would be at the front of the queue. It probably still is. But actually now I'm looking at the police service. I'm looking at law and order. I'm looking at criminal justice. I'm looking at barristers going on strike because when you break down the number of hours they do on a given case, some of them are on less than the national living wage. And it's all a direct result of political choices driven by the cabal that I've just described. So what are they going to break next? And that's why I get cross, because I know how successful it is. You remember the people that used to ring me up and say, well, we've got to make our own laws. And I'd say, well, what laws is it that you are unhappy about? And they didn't have a clue. They were primed to the point of ringing a national radio station to insist that their lives were beset and held back by laws made in Brussels by a parliament that included a significant contingent of British politicians, but which they had been persuaded was somehow an obstacle to their own personal advancement. And you would say to them, remembering that they are as convinced of this view as anyone. I mean, to stick your head above the parapet in the pub is one thing. To ring a national radio station is quite another. I'm absolutely certain of it. And then one tiny little question. What are you talking about? What laws? And they would fall apart. Like the cheapest of cheap suits. And it's happening again now. What is woke policing? No one can tell you. OK, let's find an example from this Daily Telegraph report. Last week, police officers in Lincolnshire faced criticism after being shown on social media performing the Macarena at a Pride event. OK, what else were they going to do at a Pride event? If they weren't doing the Macarena, what would they have been doing? Would they have been investigating online child sexual abuse on their phones while policing a Pride? Or would they just have been standing there not doing the Macarena? What would they have been doing? Would they have been investigating burglaries if their job that day was to be providing police security at a Pride event? If their job that day was crowd control at a Pride event, if they hadn't been doing, what would you be okay with them doing? A Sudoku? It's horrible to see the British public being taken for complete mugs yet again, with something at risk that's even more precious than membership of the biggest single market in the world. This is our criminal justice system. This is the police. This is the courts. But by inflating this and you please give me a ring and tell me what woke policing is, if you think you can make even half a decent fist of somehow linking it to crime figures in a way that 23,500 bodies being removed from the police staff is not the primary factor, then I will bite your arm off. It sounds like James has run out of compassion for the conned. It's about time too, I reckon, says Dave. No, I hate it. To see the British people, 4 out of 10 of them, swallowing this woke policing crud, it breaks my heart. Because what do you lose? When a significant part of the population are persuaded to believe lies, you lose everything. John's in Billericay. John, what do you reckon?
James, I just want to say, as someone who spent 9 years as a police officer in London on the front line responding to emergency calls, there is no such thing as woke policing.
How dare you? Last week, police officers in Lincolnshire faced criticism after being shown on social media performing the Macarena at a Pride event. Ha, 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 ha! Stick that in your pipe and smoke it.
And it's like you just said, do people actually genuinely believe if those officers weren't on aid at the Pride event that they would be out not catching burglars? They were there policing the Pride event. A song came on, they had a little dance, they're entitled to do that. It's not like they were basically out patrolling and then decided to go to Pride to do the Macarena. Yet people believe it because, unfortunately, organisations like The Telegraph, with their headlines, want to try and convince people that the reason there is such a big issue at the moment, where if you phone 999 because your house is being broken into, and the controller says to you, I'm sorry, Mr. O'Brien, we've got no units to send to you because we've got no one available. People like The Telegraph want people to believe that the reason there's no officers there is because they're out doing the Macarena.
I'm told we're mispronouncing Macarena. Apparently, I don't know how it's supposed.
That's my fault.
Come on, no, it's Macarena. Keith says Macarena, and he's a DJ. I don't know how often he plays the Macarena, but we shall address. I mean, how does it work, John? Because I'm frustrated as an observer and arguably a chronicler of this malaise. You, in a way, are a victim for it. When you were on the job, the idea that your lot are too busy doing the Macarena, that's why they're not investigating murders or not. It's so stupid. How could anybody actually believe it?
I genuinely, I wish I knew the answer to that question, because, I think people are more intelligent than we give them credit for, Like, for example, when I was on response team, if I would go out and arrest someone, I would then have to spend 8 hours doing the paperwork for that. That's 8 hours of not being out on patrol. But it seems like the mainstream media want the public to believe that, after arresting someone, I then go out and find groups to dance with or go out and take the knee. It's complete rubbish. I quite
like that as well. I'm not gay, but I do remember going to Pride one year and seeing the double-decker bus, the open-top bus with very old LGBT people on it, and actually being hit in the heart by the knowledge that the men in particular on that bus would have been put in prison at one point in their life for pursuing their natural love lives, for pursuing their sex lives. And it would have been your predecessors in uniform who would have been handcuffing them and chucking them in the back of a van. So the idea that the police might just actually reach out a bit at a Pride event to say, hey, we're here too. This is good.
Exactly. It's that unity, it's that unity of the police and, like the LGBTQ community. The fact that, as a police officer, I policed Pride events. I used to love going to those events. I mean, I'm heterosexual, not that's got anything to do with it, but it was such a friendly atmosphere.
It was more fun. It's more fun than an EDL march. But I take your point. Maybe that's the problem. They're not woke police on an EDL march. If one of them were to occasionally sidle up to a protester and say, "Oh yeah, all right, yeah," but woke police at a Pride march. Well, anyway, thank you, John. The mystery, perhaps, of how people fall for it, and it can't all be the media. And I don't know anymore. I used to be convinced that people in my line of work knew exactly what they were doing when they stoked you up to vote to leave the European Union, or to think that single mothers with flat-screen televisions were the reason why your wages were low, or that kids coming over the channel in dinghies were the reason why your daughter couldn't get a council flat. I used to think that they were making it up as they went along. But I don't know anymore. I think perhaps they don't think about it. It's as if there's a gear you don't need. When you see 4 out of 10 of the public falling for this, and you've got a column to write, or you've got a spiel but you just think, okay, well, they'll go for that. It's like you've got hungry dogs. You're not going to check the provenance of the food that you're giving them. It might actually be bad for them. It doesn't. You're just going to chuck them. There you go, have that. We'll chomp that up. 4 out of 10 of the British public think that woke policing is a problem. It so obviously isn't. And I guess what amazes people like me and John and others is that the people selling you this crud are exactly the same people that sold you Brexit, that sold you Theresa May, that sold you austerity, that sold you David Cameron, that sold you Boris Johnson, and are now selling you Liz Truss. It's the same people selling you the same product and then blaming it on God knows who when it all goes belly up. On this occasion, blaming it on woke policing. Does anyone want to have a go at telling me what that actually is? Because if I was on a Pride march and there's a police officer standing there, if he was doing the Macarena or twiddling his thumbs, I'd choose the Macarena every time. Kaz is in Bristol. Kaz, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm a woke trans woman. I'm much loved by Jacob Rees-Mogg and the Tory leadership candidates. But I actually welcome the Macarena scene in local prides, because we know that LGBT plus hate crimes are on the increase. What this is all about is about distraction. It's about distraction by right-wing Tory politicians, right-wing think tanks, just trying to distract from the fact that police numbers are down due to austerity, and the Tories are basically unable to get them back up, and just trying to distract from what's actually
from
going
reality. Actually, the best way to distract from reality is with something that's not real, something that's invented. A fake threat, a fake enemy, the wolf at the town gates that isn't even there. What I don't quite get, and I don't know whether for once, perhaps, I'm not privileged enough to understand this. I think my own privilege sometimes prevents me from understanding some issues. But rich people need the police too. Rich people need criminal justice too. So how can the interests of the very rich be served by attacking the institutions that theoretically they would need as well?
I think they're trying to basically, trying to look after their own interests. So by distracting, from the real issues in the country today, crimes are on the increase, rape crimes are not being solved, LGBT plus hate crimes are up. These are the
it doesn't hit them, does it? There's an insulation in place. There is an increase in private police forces, but more pertinently, the crime figures, if you do them by postcode, you're going to see the poorest parts of town being by far the most beset by crime. And
this is why they want to basically make it about people, police officers doing the Macarena. They want to...
Macarena, Kaz!
Macarena, I do
Flipping
apologise, I will get that correct. Can you actually do it, James?
Yeah. No, of course I can't do it. I can't even say it. What, do you want to have a go? Do you want to be the first of the day to have a go at telling me what woke policing actually is?
Woke policing, from my point of view, is policing, by the people, for the people. There's the LGBT plus community are out there. We want to see the police supporting events, pride events. And if a police officer joined in with the hokey cokey at a St. George's Day celebration, would that be woke? I wouldn't be described as woke because it'd be described as patriotic.
Funny that, isn't it? Yeah, it's the hokey cokey. It's either woke or it's not woke. It doesn't matter where it is or what it's done. It's the hokey cokey, it's the Macarena, it's the lambada, it's the can-can. Is it woke or is it not woke? Depends, James. Depends how many gay people or black people there are in the crowd. If there's lots of gay people and black people in the crowd, then it's woke. I mean, come on. You can see it now, right? Mark in Sheffield can. James, I for one would like to give a heartfelt apology because I've been taken in by all of this. I heard myself saying to the radio yesterday that the police dancing at the Macarena was an absolute disgrace. I've been fully taken in by this government and their culture wars and by the media and its vitriol. They don't remind you of the fact that they've decimated the police force. You've literally just snapped my head out of it. I'm truly sorry. Apology accepted, Mark. There is no point having a mind if you never change it. Are we going to have to talk about your Uncle Keith again? Or are you prepared to tell me, like Mark in Sheffield is, that until you gave your head a wobble, and I like to think of this programme as an unofficial head-wobbling emergency service, you were falling for this absolute nonsense that crime figures had anything at all to do with, for example, a few police officers in Lincolnshire who had the job that day of policing a pride event. In many ways, the fact that they can do the Macarena is fantastic because it means that there aren't any homophobic protesters trying to trip over the marchers or hurl abuse at the attendees. If I don't think I've been ungenerous. I'm not saying that you are stupid. I'm saying you have fallen for something and it was a stupid thing to do. Could you tell me how it happens? Could you tell me how anybody with an IQ in double figures could possibly conclude that crime figures in a country that has seen its police service more than decimated, if you want to get pedantic and technical about it, a reduction of a fifth is more than a reduction of a tenth, which is literally what decimate means. How anybody in a country whose police service has been double decimated and whose criminal justice system, whose court system has been completely kebabbed, can be successfully persuaded that the problem caused by those two phenomena are actually caused by, quotes, woke policing, end quotes. What does it mean? 03456060973. All right, I'll give you a theory. I think we just touched on it by accident with the last caller. I think woke policing is attending events that are anti-racist, or it's just attending. That's the problem. It's not, you never see complaints about the police doing the hokey cokey at a St. George's Day parade. You only ever see complaints about the police dancing at the Notting Hill Carnival or sitting down or not sitting down or not being violent enough at an Extinction Rebellion protest or doing the Macarena at a Pride festival. So environmental campaigners, gay pride marchers, anti-racist protesters. If the police do something there, then that's woke policing. But if the same police do the same thing at, for example, a Countryside Alliance march or a St. George's Day parade, then it's not woke. Which is why you won't ring me and tell me what woke policing is, because you know that eventually I'll lead you to that point and we'll see exactly what you are. Unless, like Mark in Sheffield, you've got the honesty and the decency to stare at yourself in the mirror and actually adjust your hair slightly and think, oh, crikey, I don't like the look of that. I'm going to make some changes. I'm looking at the man in the mirror. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Emma is in Newport. Emma, what's going on?
I genuinely believe that the people who believe in the whole idea of woke policing, part of the, it's delusional nostalgia. So they look back at the old police style and see, they were rough and ready.
With the gays and the people of colour, they wouldn't
with
want.
Anyone.
Not with anyone, because this wouldn't happen at a St. George's Day. I see what you mean. You mean a clip around the ear and a little bit of mild abuse never did me any harm.
Yeah, and right. The criminals were gentlemen criminals. The craze.
Leave your door open in those days. Yes.
Yeah, or they'd knock before they burgled. And some of that is from the television, reminding people in a delusional way that that's how it was. But also I was at a police museum in Manchester, which is run by a lot of ex-police. And they were saying about how the police used to be and how they've come and how far they've come, but how people will react and say, oh, well, back in my day, and they try and explain, no, it isn't like that. And they'll explain to the kids, when they do something wrong, they get the birch. And how, one, it never made any difference anyway. Two...
Well, it actually did. I mean, it embedded recidivism. So there's a touch of the hang'em and the flogg'ems here.
Yeah.
Okay. The bit that doesn't fit, the bit that, because of the word woke, they're never woke if they are if they're joining in the festivities at a if they have a slice of cake at a Women's Institute event, or they join in the conga at a St. George's Day festival. That's not woke. Why is that not woke?
No, I think they'd be woke if it was a Women's Institute event.
I don't.
Because, only...
I don't know if Women's Institute events... I don't know if Women's Institute events need policing. Do they get quite fisticuffs over those chocolate cakes sometimes? No, it's my chutney recipe. Emma's stolen my chutney. Call the police, call the cops. Maybe. You're right. Of course you're right. That nostalgia for a time that never existed, which leads us back to the blimmin' B word, doesn't it? And that idea of, if only it wasn't for all this progress and modernity. You know what they're saying now, Emma, don't you?
Button that's like, this is how it used to be, this is how it should be, Bobby on the beat. But the Bobby on the beat would have a cup of tea with you.
That's woke.
They'd have
That's
a
woke.
Chat with you.
Probably green tea. It was probably chamomile tea. That's woke. That's woke. And they're saying now, I've seen a little bit of this. I don't know whether it's percolated through to the shill client journalists yet, but I don't know what they're complaining about. We always had ice on the inside of the windows when I was growing up. All they've got to do is wear an extra jumper. It's just bizarre, actually. I don't know that I've ever really got my head fully around it. I don't think it pops up in either of my books when I've tried to unravel these positions that people have been led to. And that's the crucial point. They've been led to. Nobody wakes up this stupid and thinks, oh, yes, that burglary over the road's not being investigated because some police officers in Lincolnshire did the Macarena, while their job was to be at the event that they were attending. Their job was not to be in Bognor Regis solving a burglary. That's the point. You're led to it. 10:57 is the time. Thank you, Emma. Kathy's in Redruth in Cornwall. Kathy, what would you like to say?
Well, I think you've probably touched on it already. The crime figures the unsolved crimes are absolutely being caused by woke policing, because if our police weren't wasting their time investigating racial crime or homophobic or trans crime, or even, dare I say it, crime against women, things that weren't crimes, say, 50 years ago, then they'd have time to sort out the burglary against that nice, important, white, male, Anglo-Saxon conservative voter.
Yeah, I mean, for the purposes of the tape, your sarcasm is absolutely splendid, but some people may need me to stress that it is actually sarcasm.
I'm sorry, you don't like me being sarcastic.
I love it, but and this isn't quite as unnuanced as Twitter, but it probably needs a little bit I mean, there might be some radio phone-in programs in this country where people would ring in with these opinions. I think Sangeeta spoke to one of them on Sunday. People would ring in with these opinions, not being sarcastic. But do you think, I mean, you exaggerate as well, slightly, a touch of hyperbole, but that must be part of it, mustn't it? That's the subtext. That's the St. George's Day conundrum solved. Why is it not woke to do the hokey cokey at a St. George's Day festival, but it is woke to do the Macarena at a gay pride festival? We're spending too much time bending over backwards to accommodate these gays and these people of colour and these women as well, as I guess, as we saw with Sarah Everard, with the vigil.
Absolutely.
With the vigil.
Absolutely. I was at the Pride event in Truro on Saturday.
Oh, yes. Did you do the Macarena?
I hope he's not listening. I did not. Actually, there was plenty of dancing going on, but I was running a stand, so I didn't have much chance for
Fantastic.
it. But I was actually approached. I hope he's not listening, but I was approached by a gentleman who informed me that the current problem with the NHS is because of all the immigrants taking the NHS services away.
Yes.
And he waved his hands in the air and said, and now we've got these Ukrainians.
He sounds
now,
nice.
I don't know how many Ukrainians there are in Cornwall. I'd be surprised if it made it into treble figures.
Isn't it just?
That is not what's causing the problem you probably know.
I tell you what,
Cornwall's NHS is famous for its ambulance queues. That's not caused by dare I say it, the people who used to work for the NHS and have gone away because we made them feel so unwelcome.
Well, you know that, and I know that.
But picture, it's too many people.
And that's who's electing the next Prime Minister. Whether or not he is a fully paid-up member of the Conservative Party or not, he is very much of that ilk.
Yes, but it's that sense. There's too many of us, and the services should be going to...
Me.
In Cornwall, me.
Yeah, me.
To me.
Me.
People like me. To one away.
If you've lived a life of privilege, as a very clever caller said to me a few months or years ago, then equality feels like oppression, and that's what you're describing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
These people feel oppressed. Why are the police at a pride festival? They should be at my real ale festival or something like that. And
they should be at my real ale festival, and they should be investigating the crime against my grandma, which absolutely should be being investigated. I don't dispute that.
No, nor do I.
But the problem is that there's not enough to go round, so the police are having to prioritise, and I disagree with their priorities. And that's the woke watch bit.
Very well, there you go. If you'd brought that in 10 seconds earlier, you could have had a sting. You could have had a woke watch sting. Whoa! She got a woke. Wow, Keith pressing two buttons at once. He'll be after a pay rise next. It's 11 o'clock. Thank you, Kathy. Lovely stuff. May take a tiny bit more on this. I don't know. I find it fascinating, and it moves us into slightly new territory. Kathy's contribution does, because protecting the status quo. You don't have to be a white Anglo-Saxon straight male to protect the status quo. We saw it in the early stages of the Conservative leadership election. You can be a woman of colour, but if you're dedicated to protecting the profoundly unequal status quo by, for example, denying racism, then some of these people, some of these porky characters are going to love you. 4 minutes after 11. I'm going to take this one up to 1:15, I think. I've got some texts I want to read, some rather good texts, including one that I thought was from Idiot's Corner, but actually on reflection and thinking back to people getting in touch to say that they have successfully given their head a wobble this morning and have concluded that the whole notion of woke policing is a complete confection designed to distract from the consequences of 12 years of Tory government. And bizarrely, the people trying to sell you woke policing are exactly the same people that have sold you 12 years of Tory government. 5 minutes after 11 is the time. So, Pete in Stamford, just got a last-minute reprieve there. I don't think your text is going to come from Idiot's Corner, which means I need to find one that has come from Idiot's Corner. So we'll have this one. Dear at Mr. James O.B., why won't you talk about or even mention trans people? You mean apart from Kat in Bristol, the trans woman who rang in 20 minutes ago to talk about her experiences and opinions with regard to policing? Should we get a sting for Idiot's Corner, or would we be overdoing the stings? Can you oversting stings? Can you oversting? We would be overstinging things. We'd be overstinging things if we had a sting for Idiot's Corner. All right. You sure you're not just avoiding a bit of heavy lifting there? I like stings. And a lot of you pointing out I missed a trick with the wokey-cokey. Indeed I did. And the answer to the question of why it is only certain types of events that seem to permit woke policing is is getting close to an answer. So this doesn't go into Idiot's Corner, Pete, because I think you are, although profoundly wrong, I think your question is good in good faith, and it's quite politely phrased. James, when have you ever seen a St. George's Day parade in this country? It wouldn't be allowed for being seen as racist. And if one did go ahead, why would it need policing? I don't think policing is woke, because that's a title created by the papers, but there is a problem with the way they operate, which we only draw from our own experiences. We don't need the media to tell us that they don't do their job properly. Pete, to begin at the beginning, of course there are St. George's Day parades and St. George's Day festivals. There's one about 500 yards from the seat that I am currently sitting in every year in April. It features feasting to reflect the 13th century origins of St. George's Day. There's even Morris dancing, mate. There's all sorts of fun and games going on. There's medieval jousting. It's in Trafalgar Square. I can't remember whether it was introduced by Sadiq Khan or one of his predecessors, but the St. George's Day feast in Trafalgar Square every year is a thing to behold. To take the second point of your text, you need to have policing whenever there is an organised gathering in excess of a specified number of people, for obvious reasons, mate. You've got transport issues, you've got health and safety issues, you've got a higher likelihood of crime when you have a higher congregation of people. So everything from the Countryside Alliance March to a Black Lives Matter protest to an EDL collection or an EDL, everything needs to, even if you had a Morris dancing jamboree. If there were a sufficient number of Morris dancers there, then you would have to have policing. So because you're so profoundly wrong about the first 2 points, the necessity of policing at public events and the absence of St. George's Day celebrations anywhere in this country because it would be called racist, I hope, mate, you'll take a moment to think whether you're completely wrong about everything else as well. For example, the idea that the police aren't doing their job properly because of what the newspapers have called woke. Because you are, Pete, completely and utterly wrong. And if you can be so wrong about there being no St. George's Day parades allowed or no need for police officers at public gatherings, then obviously you can be completely wrong about policing in general as well. You're welcome. 8 after 11 is the time. Jarlath is in Birmingham. Jarlath, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. Thank you very much for taking my call, especially after the news at 11. You normally move on to second.
It's a big compliment there, isn't it? Hey, pressure's on now.
Very, very big. I actually work for West Midlands Police. I leave in a couple of weeks, mainly because of said budget cuts. I've decided to move my role.
Right.
But it was quite interesting that your previous caller was talking about protecting the status quo, and I think that's absolutely bob on, because we had the Commonwealth Games recently in Birmingham and across the West Midlands.
And indeed you did. Thank you for looking after my sister so well. She had a splendid time.
I'm very glad that we did. I'm very glad that we could help. But the point is that obviously the royal family, I think, is very much a status quo, and a lot of the media in this country do like the royal family, and things like this Commonwealth Games do enjoy. It is a very much a royal family-esque thing, and it's protecting the status quo. And we saw a lot of positive comments from people in and around Birmingham and the West Midlands saying, it was great that you were, talking with people, having photos with kids and all the rest of it. There wasn't any comments of...
There's nothing woke about that when you're mixing with the attendees at the Commonwealth Games. It's only woke when you're doing it at a Pride event or a Black Lives Matter protest.
Exactly this.
Oh, boy.
Exactly this.
Oh, boy.
Some of the comments that we had, in particular on our social platforms when we're talking about policing Birmingham Pride and everything else, are abhorrent and disgusting. And it is that sort of keeping the status quo. It doesn't matter that you're doing it for the Commonwealth Games, because it's going to be a massive thing and everyone's going to be involved in it and joyous, and it's a thing for the region, even though it's a massive thing for the royal family. But you can't bash the royal family because that's against the status quo.
Well, not even the royal family. I mean, even if the royal family weren't there, it's just a massive gathering that needs policing. Yeah. But if the police officers behave in a slightly more relaxed or approachable manner, then no one's going to give them a kicking for being woke, because it's not an event that is attended chiefly by people from certain parts of our population. It's so obvious, isn't it?
Yeah, we had just very, very quickly. We had there was a video that went around on TikTok, I believe, of an officer dancing towards in the closing ceremony or the opening ceremony, outside, waiting for people to come in and out of. And honestly, I didn't see a single person going, why isn't she investigating our burglary? Why isn't she investigating my robbery? So everyone was enjoying it and having a good time.
That's a great one.
Personally, I don't understand the difference. I really don't.
You do now. I do now.
Well,
I didn't before. I did. I mean, it's just emerged, hasn't it? Like a sort of, I don't know, like a thunderbird, one of the thunderbirds coming out of the sea, whichever the thunderbird that was. I'm going to get 100 texts now telling me which thunderbird it was.
I was a bit too young for thunderbirds, I'm afraid. James,
All right, then, but like a butterfly emerging from a chrysalis. The answer is really, really clear. It's really ugly. Anyone who talks about woke policing at a gay pride event and doesn't talk about woke policing at a Commonwealth events ceremony, when both officers in both cases are merely dancing in a peaceful and peaceable scenario, then they are essentially encouraging homophobia or racism or whatever it is that the event where woke policing took place was celebrating or commemorating. That doesn't happen as clearly as this that often, Jarlath. This is an absolute humdinger, isn't it? Stone cold clarity on this one now.
Well, I'm glad that Cassie made the point beforehand, and I just basically copping onto the back of it. So I don't want to take all the credit.
No, it's not. I'm not giving you all the credit, you cheeky beggar. This is the culmination. I'd squeeze in one more call, actually, but this is the culmination, and there it is. So don't even go for the St. George's Day theory. Look at the Commonwealth opening or closing festivals, and a police officer gets caught having a bit of a jig, having a bit of a boogie there. Why is that not woke? Should we get a tumbleweed sound effect? Should we get a... No? Okay. I've got a thing for this because Nick Abbott is the don in this game. Nick Abbott's use of sound effects is up there with Kenny Everett. I mean, it is just beautiful to behold. But the point is, know your place, O'Brien, is what Keith is thinking. You're never going to be Nick Abbott, so just step away from the sound effects, all right? You've got your sound, you've got your woke watch thing, you've got your mystery hour stuff, you've got a bed and whatever they're called. So, no, you cannot have I wanted a penny drop sound effect at one point. That would have been... No. 12 minutes after 11 is the time. Jarlath, thank you. Reece is in Huddersfield with what will probably be the last word on this. Reece, what would you like to say?
Hello. I just wanted to discuss with you the actual etymology of the term woke. Do you know where it comes from?
Well, yeah, I do. We have done this quite a few times. You mean being alive to social injustice?
Yeah, but it wasn't originally just the social injustice. It came about as part of the conspiracy theory movement in the early 2000s in association with 9/11 and all that stuff that went along with that. But the term woke originally meant to be awake, to be aware of the issues, to be...
Well, it didn't, did it? I mean, it originally meant not to sleep. It depends how far back you want to go. But in the context of current culture wars, the word woke essentially means anti-racist, and anti-woke means anti-racist. That's how I see it. Although, obviously, when you're talking about pride events, it's not racism, it's homophobia that is being tacitly encouraged.
But this whole tactic of labelling different groups of society, different sections, is been used back since the Romans. I mean, it's divide and conquer.
Yes.
Because if you're looking at the person next to you, wondering if his agenda or his motives are different from your own, you're not actually looking up at the people that are controlling our society. And our society is controlled by economic extremists.
It is now. It's worse than it's ever been. It's worse than it's ever been, isn't it? And it's happened like a frog boiling exercise, Reece.
It's a cult of finance is exactly what it is. It's the ideolatry of money. And that's what we've essentially come to.
And if you don't think that the newspaper ecosystem has skewed the playing...
Exactly.
If you don't think it's skewed the playing field enough, then you can fund a secretly funded think tank or even start your own television station.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's basically, if you have money, you have power because you have a voice. You can basically manipulate and control.
Briefly, Reece, why do so many people fall for it so easily?
Well, because people look for information that already confirms what they already believe. It's called confirmation bias. Essentially, the British public is intellectually lazy, and it's...
You sound like Liz Truss now, mate.
Well, what's going to happen is they're going to feed their appetite
but what
for
threat is being
with information
fed?
That confirms what they already think.
What threat is being fed? What feeling is being fed by a few officers in Lincolnshire doing the Macarena? If I, for example, live in Huddersfield, actually that's not far enough away. If I live in Cornwall, what prejudice is being fed? What do you see what I mean? Why am I going to be inflamed by that?
Well, because small-minded people that don't essentially are too lazy to look up the facts in the first place are more likely to cotton on to, this is further evidence of why my grandmother's burglary didn't get investigated, because there's somebody dancing the Macarena in Lincolnshire.
It's just a shortage of thinking, as with so much.
It's laziness.
Yeah.
It's laziness. People...
And we're all lazy. We're all lazy in different ways, and we all find other people...
need to be woke, though, James.
Well, I know that, and you know that. And woke is the opposite of lazy in a way, isn't it? I mean, almost literally. Thank you, Reese. I know you're on hold for a very long time, so I'm grateful to you for hanging on. 11:16 is the time. Right, up next, in case you thought that wasn't controversial enough, we're going to start talking about Shamima Begum, the schoolgirl who was groomed online by some of the nastiest characters ever to inhabit the planet. And the latest chapter in this story beggars belief. And again, you know how it works, this programme. There's no point having a mind if you never change it. But if this doesn't prompt at least some sort of rethink about the withdrawal of her British citizenship by Sajid Javid, then nothing will. 11:19 is the time. My thanks to George, who has dug out a photo of St George's Day celebration in Gravesend in 2013, and 3 young female police officers waving St George's flags. And as he points out, no one ever called that woke, and nor would they, mate, because I tell you what, anyone paying attention to the last hour and 15 minutes of radio could not fail to conclude that policing is only woke when it happens at events that celebrate equality or condemn equality. It's funny that, isn't it? And to go back to the beginning, get back to basics, woke police told. In other words, down with equality, up with inequality. And it's something I think I want to explain to you, because it's only really clicked for me in the last couple of weeks, or maybe the last couple of months. I touched on it a minute ago with the Conservative leadership campaign, because, you know, people like to say, oh, well, how come the Tories have had 3 prime ministers, 3 female prime ministers, or how come they've got so many members of ethnic minorities in their cabinet if they uphold an unequal status quo, or if they are, you know, the champions of racism or misogyny. And it took me a while to understand this, and I needed your help. But it's all about the system, not the individual. So something quite profound shifted in my understanding of our country when Downing Street released that ludicrous report claiming that there was no systemic racism in the United Kingdom, something that is so obviously at odds with observable reality that you sort of wonder whether perhaps it's you that needs to give your head a wobble. We're not the most racist country in the world, but the idea that there isn't any systemic racism is just ridiculous. But of course, it's not the white cabinet ministers who are sent out to champion and promote that. It's the cabinet ministers of colour, which makes you as a white commentator a little bit wary of criticising it, which is, again, calculation. They know that this is what's going to happen. So what you need to appreciate is the difference between the system and the individual. So if you are a beneficiary of an unequal system and a member of a community that is historically or traditionally a victim of an unequal system comes along to defend the unequal system, you are going to bite their arm off, you know? A gay man who writes in the Daily Mail about how we spend too much time bending over backwards to accommodate gay rights is manna from heaven for these bigots. A black man who will write in the Daily Mail about how we spend too much time bending over backwards to accommodate Black Lives Matter protests or Black Lives Matter issues. You know, it's manna from heaven. When a black footballer comes forward to say, I don't like the Black Lives Matter kneeling because I think it actually distracts from the bigger issues and it means that we're not concentrating on actual measurable substantive change, it appears in the right-wing newspapers as, oh, a black man doesn't like the Black Lives Matter taking the knee. So it's taken me a while to get there, and I've been meaning to share that with you for a while because it is quite difficult sometimes to find the confidence to counter these very deliberate conservative attack lines that are supposed to insulate them from accusations of what they obviously are. You know, the party that comes up with the Rwanda policy, which we'll talk about shortly, is clearly a party committed to stoking the very, very worst flames of bigotry and racial prejudice. But of course, if it's a Home Secretary of Asian heritage who's doing it, they think that they're golden. They think that they're insulated from accusations of racism. But, you know, you even have candidates standing for far-right parties who are from ethnic minorities. I think Priti Patel's dad was a UKIP candidate, wasn't he? It's exactly the same process. And that's the end of my TED Talk. 22 minutes after 11 is the time. Right, okay, this one's tricky. Why is it tricky? It's tricky, and one of the reasons why you won't be hearing or reading much about this story in newspapers that have previously had very strong, or indeed TV and radio programs that have previously had very, very strong and pungent editorial lines to take upon the plight or the story of Shamima Begum, the 15-year-old schoolgirl who was groomed online and then essentially trafficked to Syria, where she became a sex slave for an ISIS soldier. When she was no longer a child and she was tracked down by, I think, the Sunday Times, she stated that she had no regrets. I think, you put that in there, but you put it in there in context. There are victims of grooming gangs in the north of England who still insist that their abusers were actually their boyfriends. That's the insidious nature of grooming. But what has emerged in a book by the former security correspondent of the Sunday Times, Richard Kerbadge, who we'll be speaking to, I think, on the programme tomorrow, what has emerged is that the Canadian Secret Service, or the Canadian Security Services, were involved. That they were being helped through Turkey and would ultimately be taken over the border into Syria by a double agent working for the Canadian Security Services, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS. It's a claim in a book. As I say, we'll talk to Richard tomorrow, but the coverage it has received today and the response from British and Canadian governments does not extend to denial. It's all about, we never comment on matters like this. If you had stone cold proof that this was hogwash, you'd be commenting on matters like this. So these three girls were taken through Turkey and into Syria by a man who was ostensibly an ISIS operative, but was actually feeding information back to the Canadian Secret Services. And the Canadians didn't tell us about it. Five Eyes is supposed to be the world's closest intelligence sharing network, and the idea that Canada hid from a fellow member of Five Eyes the involvement of a trafficker on their payroll into Islamic State territory is breathtaking. Even as the Metropolitan Police announced a search for the girls. So the Metropolitan Police sought international cooperation, and an ally, the closest ally you can have in the context of these sort of matters, i.e. a fellow member of Five Eyes, stayed absolutely silent. So this fella, Mohammed al-Rashid, was arrested in Turkey. He'd sent copies of the girls' passports to his Canadian handlers. He did so. In fact, the alarm should have been raised as soon as he sent copies of the girls' passports to his Canadian handlers. A close ally would expect to be trusted with such information, even if it were not openly pulled into the whole network. And when they began to fear exposure, when they thought the story was going to come out, that's when Canada owned up. That's the report. That's the claim in Richard Kerbadge's book. So this means that this woman now, girl then, this groomed schoolgirl, if our close ally Canada had abided by some of the unwritten rules of that alliance and some of the presumptions upon which the Five Eyes intelligence sharing network is built, she never would have got to Syria. She never would have got to ISIS territory. She never would have become, in her own mind, as a groomed schoolgirl, a bride, in the minds of anybody honest and objective, a sex slave for a murderous terrorist who went on to lose several children because of the conditions in which she found herself living. So if the alliance had been abided by, she never would have reached ISIS territory. She never would have become a so-called ISIS bride. None of them would. And the grounds for stripping her of her citizenship would never have been established. Such a strange thing, that citizenship. Isn't it funny? That little TED talk I gave you a minute ago about politicians of colour who appeal to some of the baser instincts of voters, being sometimes even more robust in their pursuit of that constituency than white politicians. It was Sajid Javid who revoked her citizenship. It was during his relatively brief tenure as he's been around the houses, hasn't he, Sajid Javid? He's had a crack at most of the big jobs, and this is, I guess, his most notable quotes achievement, end quotes, is stripping a victim of sex trafficking of her British citizenship as a punishment for her victimhood. I'm provoking you a little bit with some of my choice of language, but only a little bit, because my language is accurate. It's technically accurate. You could also call her a terrorist sympathiser, of course. You could probably make a case for her being a terrorist, but not when she's 15. Not when she's 15. A schoolgirl runs away to France with a teacher, and the police forces of both countries are setting off in hot-footed pursuit. No one talks about stripping her of her citizenship, quite rightly, nor should they. But this schoolgirl is trafficked into ISIS territory by a double agent reporting back to the Canadian security services, completely ignoring appeals from the Metropolitan Police for help in tracking them down, in order to stop her getting there. But she gets there. But she gets hooked up to an ISIS murderer, but she gets pregnant several times and loses several children, but she subsequently gets found by British journalists, and then she gets her British citizenship removed. She is rendered effectively stateless because Sajid Javid, and this is my opinion now, up until this point it's been pure fact, Sajid Javid thinks it would do his popularity in the Conservative Party a world of good to strip this brown woman of her citizenship. 0345 6060973. I mentioned that when she was tracked down by the Times in 2019, she said she had no regrets. She has since expressed regret and said that she was groomed and trafficked. You see, again, for me, a woman who is groomed by men is the story. I don't care what colour the woman is or what colour the man is. I care when I think that the colour is going to affect different treatment. But if a victim of a grooming gang in Shropshire, in Telford, were to, in 2019, have said, I have no regrets, I still love him, and then in 2022 to say, I have loads of regrets, I was groomed, I was trafficked, I was abused, I've completely seen the light about what happened to me, no one would question that. Just think about this. I think it's quite important. No one would question that. Would they? The reason why these scumbags got away with so much was because these poor girls thought they were girlfriends. They thought they were partners. Even the most cursory reading of investigations into this, and we started covering grooming gangs on this programme long before little Tommy Ten Name started rattling his tin. The reason they got away with it is because that's what grooming does. It convinces you that you are desired, beloved, cherished, whether it's happening online or in the back of a takeaway in Dewsbury. That's how it works. And then the girls, essentially, I don't want to say get better, but they see the light. And they realise that they have been victims. And that's when prosecutions can be pursued. Read Nazir Afzal's book, the chief prosecutor up in the Northwest, about this. It's absolutely riveting. Or listen to his full disclosure interview with me if you don't have time for a whole book. So that's what's happened here. Or at least, if it isn't what's happened here, then people aren't going to be queuing up to call those girls in Telford liars in the way that they might be queuing up to call Shamima Begum a liar. That's incredible, right? Except, of course, it's not. So, 11:32 is the time. Does this render the removal of her citizenship unfair? It's a question the courts are going to turn their attention to quite soon. The Supreme Court judgment last year upheld the decision to bar her from returning to the UK. She is taking it further, I think, either later this year or early next year. But if she was physically trafficked by an ISIS operative in contact with Canadian Secret Services. A 15-year-old schoolgirl physically trafficked across Europe. A 15-year-old British schoolgirl physically trafficked across Europe by a foreign spy in order to get sought-after access to ISIS agents and insights into the process of recruiting foreigners. How can her citizenship be how can she be punished for being a victim of both sex trafficking and subsequently sexual abuse? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Lottie Morley has your headlines. 36 minutes after 11. So, I mean, I'd be interested to speak to Richard Kerbadge, who's written this book, tomorrow. I mean, for what it's worth, and my opinion is worth no more than anybody else's, I think it's close to impossible that the British security services knew. I think that this revelation that the Canadian services didn't tell us, for want of a better word, that they had a spy trafficking Shamima Begum and her two friends into Syria. But I'll tell you when it didn't come out. It didn't come out last year when the Supreme Court upheld the decision to bar her from returning to the UK. There was no mention that the British authorities knew how she was smuggled into Syria in last year's Supreme Court judgment. Now, whether that information was... I mean, I guess what I'm thinking is, if Priti Patel knew that this had happened, would she have provided that information to the court? Because from where I'm sitting, it's a game changer. You may disagree, but if you disagree, then you must also argue that victims of grooming gangs in the north of England, chiefly, of course, populated by men of Pakistani origin, you must also agree that girls who were groomed and trafficked by them are not allowed to change their mind about being their girlfriends and conclude that instead they are victims of terrible crimes. Otherwise, you're going to have to tell me what the big difference is. 38 minutes after 11 is the time. Becky is in Kenilworth. Becky, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Hope you're okay. I just had to leave the office for an early lunch after hearing that because it was just so upsetting. I remember talking about this with my students in year 10 and 11 classes when the whole debate had come out about whether Shamima Begum was going to be stripped of her citizenship, and a lot of the girls, interestingly, were saying that they wouldn't have fallen for it, they wouldn't have let themselves be groomed and things like that. And I was just looking at them, not obviously saying anything because of confidentiality, but I knew they were friends with girls in their school who had fallen victim to this, and so while I didn't talk, not
to ISIS grooming, but
but generally to child sexual exploitation,
right.
and this grooming, and I couldn't say anything specifically, but I was like, you don't know until that sort of first message happens, and you go down the rabbit hole because because these are older men preying on young girls. They know exactly what to say to manipulate them, and I was saying even if she didn't express regret, even if she genuinely believed all of this, that shouldn't have. It's
her age. Her age is
the
key factor in this for you.
Yeah, she should have been treated like a child. She should have been treated like a victim. Just the fact that it was taking place in a different country should not have happened. And
she wasn't just signing up for chips and parties. And I'm using that phrase very carefully. I mean, what went on in the cases you're referring to and the cases that I've already referred to was infinitely worse than that. But in the early stages of the grooming process, what was on offer for Shamima Begum was much more than jewelry and alcohol, wasn't it? It was membership of a murderous terrorist force. So grooming is the right word to use. It's the right verb, but we need different nouns, perhaps.
Yeah, and and it's quite likely that obviously I'm not completely understanding of it, but it's quite likely that it would have been sold to her as you'll be helping rebuild a fundamentalist Islamic state. It would have been on religion. They would have said you'll be treated like a queen, you'll be treated much better than you are at the moment, and we understand you and all of that kind of thing. So the language and the offers may have been different, but essentially the way they would have manipulated her is essentially the same. And just to hear that there are security forces involved, who knew what was going on, who would have been privy to information that could have seen her safely returned home and, and hopefully de-radicalised. And now she's gone through all of this. She's gone through pregnancy loss. She's gone through how much trauma, and we're just ignoring all of that because, I don't know whether it's partly down to racism or Islamophobia, but we're just ignoring everything she's gone through.
Well, we forget the universality, and that's where all of these isms come from. Is that actually no, we're not the same. That couldn't happen to me. That's not a universal issue. And the girls that you had in your class, in a way, are doing just self-protection. They're trying to persuade themselves, as we all do sometimes, that the terrible things that have happened to that person over there couldn't happen to me because I am not like them. I am different from them. So sort of two sides of the same coin. Becky, thank you. Enjoy your early lunch. I hope it hasn't been too disturbed by the tricky nature of some of this territory, some of this conversation. The claim is that the Canadians stayed silent when the Met asked anyone to come forward who had seen the teenagers because they didn't want to, I guess, blow the cover of their spy. He'd photographed their passports on the pretext of needing proof of identity to buy them transport tickets and then sent the images to his handlers in the Jordanian embassy. This is crucial. The Times reports that the Canadians could not have stopped the girls' travel because by the time the handler was told they had already crossed the border, this is the claim in the book, but the Canadians' revelation or sharing of the information had more to do with covering their back than offering up any form of apology. The contention is that they were hoping to avoid any further inquiries into the journey because it would be very embarrassing. If you are running agents, you are acquiescing to what they are doing. You are turning a blind eye to their actions because it is being trumped by a rich vein of intelligence. And it's incredible, really, that this story has only just come out. Parviz is in Romford. Parviz, what would you like to say?
Hello, how are you?
Hello,
Thank
mate.
you for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
I apologize if I'm nervous because I've never made a call in my life. So.
Don't worry.
But I feel really, really strong about this case because, as I said to you, I think the lady who answered the call, I'm a father. I care about my child. This girl could have been my daughter or could be yours.
Yes.
Okay? As you said, I agree with everything you said previously. If this girl wasn't brown, she would never have lost her citizenship. She's been raped. She's been smuggled. God knows what else has happened to her. To lose 3 children of her own, whether she was, willingly having the children or whether she was raped. I mean, what kind of decent human being would deprive a young girl of her rights? She may well be a terrorist sympathizer. I don't know. You don't know. But if she's done anything wrong, she has the right to come back to her country of birth and be trialed for it. Now, as you said, and I agree with you, the worst culprit in this situation is Savage Javid, and the one that followed him, that lady, what's her name?
Priti Patel. Yes.
As you said, they've been whiter than white just so they can appeal to their constituents so that they can, climb the ladder of success in the Conservative Party. They've condemned this girl to a life of hell. They killed her newborn baby. I remember, I followed this at the beginning when the news came out, where she had a baby and she was afraid the baby will die. They killed her newborn baby.
To be clear, we're talking about ISIS now, not Priti Patel and Sajid Javid.
No, I'm talking about Priti Patel and Sajid Javid.
They didn't
She
kill.
had the baby.
Yes,
you
I know.
When they found her initially.
You mean that by prolonging her isolation and her.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's a strong accusation, and I'm just moderating your language slightly. They may. Okay, you could argue they contributed to the death. They didn't kill her, Parviz.
Well, okay. Let's just say I only know what I know from the news I hear. Yes. At the time, they said they found her in a camp and she had a baby that was sick. Is that true or false?
No, I think that's true. And then they left her there.
And they were saying that this baby is likely to die because she's already lost 2 children, right?
Yeah.
So with that knowledge, with that information, Sajid Javid decided to withdraw her citizenship and leave her there And the outcome would have been, obviously, the baby will die. There's no other way around it. Right?
Your logic is impeccable. I just, the mens rea of actually killing a child just gave me pause, but only briefly. I hear you, and I want to ask you one more question about this revelation today about the Western spy who took her to Syria. I mean, your position isn't going to change because your position was already one of compassion and understanding. But do you think objectively it's a game changer? Do you think it makes the legal case or the political case much harder to sustain?
Yes, James, I could be wrong, but this information was out there already. When these children disappeared from the UK, within a few weeks or a few days, people were reporting that Western intelligence is behind trafficking these kids into Syria. That I heard on the news at the time.
Did you?
So whether or not we've got more detail today...
I don't remember that, but I don't doubt your memory. I guess that is... I mean, it was always a mystery how the 3 15-year-olds could have made that journey unaccompanied or unaided. I guess the conclusion that someone was helping them was fairly easy to arrive at. I hadn't heard before the suggestion that a Western spy... No, I don't. I'm just saying I hadn't heard it before, that a Western spy might have been involved.
But I think the Turkish authorities at the time declared that Western intelligence assisted these kids in their transfer.
But then we would all have gone, well, they would say that, wouldn't they? Because they're trying to wash their hands of responsibility for the fact that these girls passed through the country without anybody spotting them.
No, that's true. But it could always be negative. They said Khashoggi was killed by the Saudi Arabian whoever.
Yeah.
Why would they lie? Something so obvious. But anyway, it doesn't really matter.
No, I know. I was just trying to account for it because it's such a sort of hodgepodge of memory. One thing you said there, it could have been my daughter, it could have been your daughter. I agree with you for what it's worth. Unlikely in the context. I think Parviz is a Persian name, isn't it? So you're an Iranian.
It is.
Yeah. Well, then your daughter is, less likely than these girls to fall for this.
But not really. We don't control our children.
Exactly. I mean, I wanted you to address the people who say, well, no, this could never happen to me. This could never happen to my daughter.
I'm sorry, I've seen things in my life.
Yeah.
And my worst fear is my daughter. I've only got one daughter.
Yeah.
Her being misled or abused. And when I see some other child in such terrible situation, I mean, like you said, if I go and abuse a child in this country, and obviously they are 15 or 14 or not above the legal age, I am a paedophile. They will hunt me and they will punish me. In her case, they're punishing her for being abused. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. And then they're kicking her while she's down.
I don't think you can get past that, actually, when you put it in such stark terms, and it makes Sajid Javid's decisions reprehensible. Morally it does. Legally, for now, they were justifiable, but one wonders whether the new information about the Western spy taking her to Syria will change that. Parviz, for considering you were nervous at the beginning, that was a most excellent debut, and I thank you for it. Very powerful. And I don't want anyone who's listening to this thinking, no, that couldn't happen to my daughter, feel insulted or judged. It's a natural defence reaction. I don't know what it is. It's almost the way we're wired. Parviz sees the threats that this world poses to everybody, but to young women in particular, and he thinks there, but for the grace of God, maybe not this particular threat, but another threat. And the reassurance you derive from thinking it could never happen to me or mine is false reassurance and possibly, therefore, problematic. You don't want to live your life in constant fear. You can't wrap your children in cotton wool, but you've got to acknowledge that 15-year-old girls are not fully responsible for their own actions when men with malevolent ambitions start trying to turn their heads. It's 10 to 12. It is 11:53. Quite a lot of you sending me links to some of the stuff that the last caller Parviz was referring to. CBS News obtains Turkish intelligence report outlining Mohammed al-Rashid's claims, and that's back in 2015. The accusations, the reports that a spy had been accused of helping the teens that fled Bethnal Green join ISIS, claiming he worked for Canadian intelligence. I missed it. What can I say? And there it is now, it would appear, being completely confirmed. My fear is, Gary Burton makes another excellent point, callers who start off feeling nervous tend to end up being excellent. I couldn't agree more, actually. It's often the way. callers who start off being super confident sometimes have precisely the opposite experience as well, but such is life. I don't know whether this changes minds. It's because it's tribal, isn't it? It's footballification. Sajid Javid knew exactly what he was doing when he stripped her of her citizenship, and it had very little to do with natural justice or morality and everything to do with politics and personal ambition. So if you were the kind of person that Sajid Javid was appealing to when he stripped this sexually trafficked schoolgirl of her citizenship, will the knowledge that she was actually smuggled into ISIS territory by a Western spy change your opinion at all? I fear not, but you have to keep fighting. You have to keep fighting the good fight. 11:54 is the time. Terry's in Southgate. Terry, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. Yeah, you've changed it to smuggled, which is the correct word, rather than sorry, I forget the claim before. But yeah, that's my problem. I don't think they were trafficked at all. So I think you saying
why not?
They were trafficked.
Sorry, I must withdraw that. Then I mean, smuggled and trafficked are synonyms on this occasion.
Well, yeah. I mean, for example, my annoyance with the whole painting her as being trafficked is that she was picked up in Bethnal Green with the other girls, chucked in a lorry. They were smuggled across to, Syria.
No, mate. Most victims of sex trafficking willingly get into the vehicles that bring them across the world because they're told lies. They're told lies about where they're going. They're told that they've got jobs, or that they've got.
That's not my understanding of it. My understanding of it is
5 minutes ago, 40 seconds ago, you couldn't remember the word.
Right, no, because you changed a minute ago.
But you couldn't remember the word you didn't like, and now you're trying to school me on what it really means, Terry.
You were using the word trafficking, and you changed it to smuggle.
No, I've used both words in the same conversation. I'm not changing one from the other.
They're the same thing, do you?
Yes, in the context of this conversation. They can mean different things in the context of other conversations, but trafficking is not kidnapping. Trafficking often involves people who have willingly got into the vehicle that transports them across borders. Just as grooming, another word that's very pertinent to this conversation.
Grooming applies.
Always involves victims who are seduced. They are persuaded into doing these things. And at the time of doing them, sometimes they would argue that they were doing it of their own free will. But we know, of course, that they weren't, and often they reach that realisation later themselves. I mean, it's an odd thing to be picking up on, Terry.
It's not, James. Not when.
Oh, it is.
Some of the stories I know about trafficking from Eastern Europe don't involve people willingly jumping into the back of lorries. Okay,
it wouldn't be with sex trafficking. It wouldn't usually be a lorry. It would be a minibus or a coach. I mean, it's all very well documented. So let's say some people.
We had the lorry full of Chinese people, didn't we? Turn up.
Yes, but that's not your experience of things in Eastern Europe, is it?
No,
and they did get in. Terry, they did get into the lorry willingly.
Yes. But you're talking about the 3 girls that went to join ISIS?
No, I'm talking about the Chinese people who were coming here to work in the black economy, having been made various promises about what their new lives would look like.
Well, again, that's speculation. I doubt you've had conversations with anyone that knew them.
For a start, I think they were Vietnamese. Terry, I think everybody knows why you rang up, but do carry on.
Okay, so the reason I rang up is you started the conversation with allegedly about this Canadian special agent, and then you used the words...
the reason you rang up was because you didn't like the word trafficking, Terry, unless you were fibbing 3 minutes ago.
No, that's it. That's 100% it. Yeah,
right.
It doesn't apply.
No, but we've just established that it does apply, and that some people will be trafficked, some people will get into the vehicle willingly, and some people, which you have great experience of in Eastern Europe, as you proved by citing some Vietnamese people that you call Chinese, some people may be put into vehicles against their will. So in a sentence, Terry, what is the point that you rang in to make?
The point I rang in to make, James, is basically that they weren't trafficked, okay? She obviously wants to come back to the UK now because she's in a hardship and it didn't work out for her. Who knows what she's witnessed? Who knows what she's done? And alas, there are people like you that are lauding it that probably do want her. I mean, do you want her to come back to the UK?
What am I lauding?
The fact that she's, this poor little girl's been trafficked and held.
What do you think lauding means?
Well, in other words, you're pushing the point that you.
No, what do you think lauding means? I'm genuinely curious.
You think that she's innocent.
She's not. What, innocent of what?
Innocent of being, well, she was trafficked in the way you're selling it.
We've established that means. What do you think lauding means? We know you don't know what trafficking means. What do you think lauding means?
You talk, James, then I'll talk. And if you can let me finish.
I'm asking you a question. What does lauding mean? I want to be clear that I understand what you're saying.
Okay. Lauding, in my opinion, is used.
We've got to agree on a dictionary definition, mate. What do you think lauding means?
Well, James, you're a much more eloquent and
you can say that again, but it's a word you used. I'm asking you what it means. What does lauding mean?
Well, to big up a situation, to make it seem the case when it's not.
Okay, should we leave it there?
No.
To big up a situation, to make it seem a case when it's not.
James, again, you can try and cut me down on my lack of
Terry, you used the word. You used the word. You don't know what it means. You don't know what trafficking means. You don't know what lauding means. You don't know what grooming means. You don't know what goodbye means.
I might give you some more ammunition. Why don't you just let me speak for a second?
Go on then.
Okay. So my point is, James, you started this conversation with allegedly, okay? And the way you are now describing things as if they are factual, okay?
It's 12 noon. 4 minutes after 12 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I like this new quarter past junction that we've started deploying. We'll take this up to quarter past and then we'll talk. Keith's not convinced. All right, maybe not every day. But then we'll have a little look at the food bank story. We can't turn away from the cost of living crisis, even though it may occasionally be tempting to do so. It's a betrayal of the people who are at the coalface, who are at the front end of it. And given that most of the newspapers are still dedicating the right-wing newspapers still dedicating their front pages to Meghan Markle, woke policing. And, I mean, the Daily Express is sort of hagiography of Boris Johnson, a man who has been chucked out of Downing Street by his own cabinet for promoting a sex pest and then lying about it. Is upbeat. Boris Johnson says he is proud of delivering on his promises and backed his successor to grab the torch and run with it. Tomorrow, remind me, we'll have a look at the question of whether there is any difference at all between that rhetoric, that idea, and Donald Trump's continuing lie that he won the election in America. But a couple more calls on this. Western spy took Begum to Syria, trafficked, indeed, Begum to Syria, because if, for example, a groomed schoolgirl in Rochdale were to get into a car that was being used to drive her to the scene of further abuse, she is being trafficked, even if she was tempted into that car by the pervert who had groomed her. I appreciate not many people need that explaining, but I'm here for everyone who does. We haven't really seen a change in approach brought about by the new revelation, which feeds into my fear / suspicion that this is not going to, what's the word? Well, I suppose butter any parsnips. If you were of the view that she deserves no sympathy in the first place, then the fact that she was trafficked across Turkey by a spy, a Western spy, may not change your mind. In fact, you're probably going to end up desperate to redefine words like trafficking. Otherwise, the alternative is to feel a bit of compassion, sympathy, or at the very least, a little bit of there, but for the grace of God. Jen's in Manchester. Jen, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi. Yeah, hi, James. Thanks for having me. Yeah, what I'd like to say is that the brain isn't developed until you're 25, and with MRI...
I thought you were talking about me then, Jen, for a minute.
No. Yeah, the brain isn't properly developed until you're 25, and the thing is, you've got smart teenagers who will do the most stupid things.
Yeah.
You've got the thing is, in your brain, the prefrontal cortex isn't, like I said, properly developed for many up until you're 25, and that responds to good judgment and thinking of like long-term consequences. And sadly, this is why you see at festivals when teenagers do the most stupid thing and they take a drug. The risk taking is so much higher. But like I said, we have proof. There's medical science, and people, that doesn't make headlines, does it? It doesn't make headlines. 15-year-old, she's a girl.
I suppose it's reflected in the notion of criminal responsibility, isn't it? I mean, that's the point. We do acknowledge that if you do something when you're 10, you shouldn't be judged. I mean, it wasn't always like this. You'd got deported to Australia for nicking a loaf of bread in Victorian times, but you're not going to be judged according to the same criteria and standards as you would be when you're 20.
No, but you can't, like, she couldn't vote.
No.
She couldn't drive a car. She wouldn't be allowed to get married illegally, and also you can't buy a house till you're 18. So when people are saying she deserves whatever, not to get...
Saying, well, let's put it better. She knew exactly what she was doing is the argument, I think, isn't it?
Yeah,
Rather than she deserves this, that, or the other.
No, well, she didn't know because she's 15.
Yeah.
She was groomed. She was a child. And people are just so hateful. They don't want to read into things. They don't want to do the bigger picture because it's not exciting, is it? It's not a sexy headline. But people should really look into themselves and look at the science, look at the brain. Like I said, I know I keep repeating myself, but if your brain isn't properly developed until you're 25, and MRI scans are showing this now, but the politicians don't want to know. You've got the court system where she wouldn't be tried in court. She'd be tried as a child. But...
she wasn't tried in a court, was she? She was tried in the court of tabloid opinion, and we all know what happens there. And there isn't a difference, I don't think, between the poor girls in places like Rochdale who were groomed and who thought that their abusers were their girlfriends, but their boyfriends rather. They thought that their abusers were their boyfriends, even as they were being passed around. Like a belonging, and to argue that because they were doing it willingly or because they thought that they were doing it willingly, they're somehow not proper victims. It's quite perverse, actually.
It is perverse, and there's no regard for psychological maturity here, and I find it heartbreaking. I really do, and the hate towards this girl, rather than the people who have groomed her. There's no people it
wouldn't happen in any other context. I mean, don't forget the fear of terrorism, particularly with the passage of time. It dissipates slightly. At one point, we were waking up every morning wondering whether there'd been another attack somewhere in the West, whether it was in Nice or in Paris or in London. So that informs decent people's emotional responses to stories. But the idea of a trafficked, groomed, sex abuse victim deserving punishment is actually quite remarkable, even if, according to the Supreme Court last year, it can be legally justified. It is morally close to unbelievable. But, we've all spoken to people that are on the other side of the river on this one.
I will never understand. It's the young people that are being failed. She's been failed, and how anybody can say different, but the country, the way it is, I am not surprised. There's too much hatred.
We shall see where this story goes with the new development, with the information that it was a Western spy who took Begum into Syria, Shamima Begum into Syria in 2015, and that the plea for help from the Metropolitan Police, or the plea for information from the Metropolitan Police, went unheeded by our Canadian allies. And as I say, hopefully we'll be speaking to Richard, who wrote the book, tomorrow. Thank you, Jen. Mo's in Birmingham. Mo, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Thank you for taking my call.
You're very welcome, Mo. What would you like to say?
James, I wish to slightly put a different angle to this discussion here, and it's one that has a slightly sinister element to it,
Go on.
actually. Take you back to 2012, 2013, the West was dead set against President Assad. They wanted him removed and were prepared to work with a whole variety of different Syrian opposition groups. Some of them are very dubious quality to achieve that aim. Now, ISIS was, or embryonic ISIS was, probably the most motivated, probably the most organized, and the one that had most potential to remove President Assad. Now, this revelation...
I'd just pause you there. I mean, when I see the West determined to remove a Middle Eastern leader, I don't think of President Assad. I think of Saddam Hussein, actually. So where are you deriving this determination from, when I think most would argue that the West dropped a huge ball when it comes to Assad and did next to nothing to stop his regime continuing, with the connivance, of course, of Vladimir Putin?
I think again, it's my opinion.
No, I know, and I'm just asking for the evidence that supports it. If the West want to remove a Middle Eastern leader, there's a fairly well-established precedent for proving how they do it, isn't there? So to argue that they were desperate, they were so desperate, as I think we both know you're about to do, they were so desperate to get rid of Assad that they green-lighted the sort of smuggling of women into Syria to somehow help motivate Daesh forces. They're not prepared to actually get stuck in, but they are prepared to facilitate the smuggling of women. I know you did warn me that it was going to be a slightly left field approach. I think it's a bit daft, isn't it, Mo?
This is my point here. I think what the Iraq War, the 2003 intervention in Iraq did was that it made such overt military intervention difficult to pull off again with the public because of
I'd give you that. No, there was, but I don't know that feeds into the idea, well, let's smuggle women, let's smuggle schoolgirls there in order to make them fight harder.
No, I think, again, it is my opinion. And,
I understand that.
Fair and so on. I think that the use of potential Western intelligence assets to open up avenues of discussion with ISIS before their full barbarity became completely unavoidable and made it completely unacceptable to work with them as a potential opposition group to Assad is not unheard of.
Not completely beyond the bounds of possibility. I think the fact that they were schoolgirls actually wouldn't be relevant to the equation that you're calculating, would it? Because the security services would think that is the end will justify the means. And in fact, I'll withdraw the daft on that, because if you're talking about the end justifying the means, then Western security services historically have done all manner of outwardly abominable things because they believed that the end justified the means. There is clearly no suggestion, though, that the British security services were party to this information, because they were only made aware of it when the Canadians were worried about it emerging against their will and against their wishes. But no, I hear you. And goodness knows, it once again casts these girls as victims rather than as culprits. And, I mean, I don't think I could, in good conscience, use the word... Well, do you know what I was about to say? I was about to say I don't know if I could use the word blameless to describe this girl, this young woman, Shamima Begum. But I think I can, in the same way that I can use the word blameless to describe every single victim of grooming in this country at the hands of the very well-documented cases involving largely Pakistani men. Of course the victims are blameless. So why isn't she? 18 minutes after 12 is the time, and we go again. I want to talk about this, but it's not important enough, apparently. Sainsbury's now are getting rid of best before dates to, quotes, reduce waste, end quotes. 100 fresh products in a move that they say will save 11,000 tonnes of food waste each year. And I mean, they must be telling the truth, mustn't they? Do I sound naive when I say that? I mean, it's... How does it... Because all I know now is that I can buy a cucumber in a shop that doesn't have the best before date on it, and it will be mush by tea time tomorrow. Whereas previously, I'm quite a canny shopper. I'd rummage around at the back of the cucumbers and get the one that had a couple of even more days on its best before. But I'm not allowed to talk about this one. Well, I say I'm not allowed. We've had an editorial conference and decided that we must turn our attention to more important matters. But it's bubbling away. We've done it before quite recently. The number of supermarkets that have now signed up to this is huge. And I think last time we did it, we got a call from someone who works for WRAP, the anti-waste charity. So, if they're in favour of it, it must be a good idea. But I'm doing it again, aren't I? I can't get my head around it. So I think there must be something suspect going on. I can't get my head around it. The Food Standards Agency says use-by dates are linked to food safety, whereas best before dates relate to food quality. And that's my problem, is that when I buy something, I want the best. Anyway, I'm not doing that one. In fact, that is a first world problem, isn't it? That is a luxury. Imagine having the luxury of wanting to keep your cucumber nice and turgid. It means you've got cucumbers. It means you're shopping. It means you can afford to go shopping. We're talking now about people who can't. And two stories combine to create, once again, a very troubling scenario. The surging price of food, including margarine, crisps and milk, has pushed shop inflation to a new high in August. War in Ukraine, increasing costs for farmers. If like me, you sometimes think, how does that work then? Then it's not just the most obvious things like the import and export of grain or oil. It's also things like fertilizer. Ukraine is a massive producer, a massive exporter of fertilizer. It means prices in shops have gone up by 5.1%. That's just shy of a whole percentage point in a month. Food producers now passing on increases in the cost of fertilizer, wheat and vegetable oils, large amounts of which are produced in Ukraine and Russia. This is the figures from the British Retail Consortium and others. It means that fresh food prices rose by 10.5%. That's the highest rate since September 2008, when we were in the middle of that global financial, or when we were on the brink, actually, of that global financial collapse. 10.5% inflation on fresh food. I almost don't want to tell you this, but I will. Goldman Sachs, who generally know what they're doing, whether you think they're a force for good or a force for ill or somewhere in between, they have warned that inflation in the UK could top 22% next year, which we haven't seen since 1975. That's if wholesale energy prices remain at current high levels. Noise from, apparently you should wrap your cucumber in a tea towel before putting it in the fridge. Thank you for that advice from Stephen and others. There you go, you live and learn. Don't look at me like that. I'm just a conduit. Don't shoot the messenger. It sounds like a nice idea. I think the plastic must accelerate. I don't know. Let me know how you get on with your tea towel wrap. Actually, don't. Let Steve Allen know, and then he can pass it on to me, how you get on with your tea towel wrap cucumbers. Where was I before I got distracted by tea towels and cucumbers? Why do you wrap your cucumber in a tea towel? Imagine someone just tuning in now. We've just done basically an hour, 2.5 hours straight of incredibly highfalutin and sophisticated radio phone-ins. And now we're talking about wrapping your cucumber in a tea towel, honestly. 1975, wholesale energy prices. Yeah, there we are. So the wholesale energy prices actually came down a bit yesterday because the European Union is addressing the problem and moving together to try to solve some of these problems, most obviously with storage and similar and over-reliance upon Russian gas. Funny that, isn't it? It sounds like a good organisation to be part of. So simply by announcing that they're having a look at a problem, the market's moved. By simply saying we're going to work together to alleviate this crisis, the markets actually began to move and the price came down. How do you join something like that? That sounds incredible. It's almost as if a market that contains 500 odd million people might have a bit more clout on the world stage than a market that contains 50 or 60 million people. Does that make sense to you? I mean, I don't know what business you're in, but would you rather be operating without any restrictions or barriers in a market of 500 million people or in a market of 60 million people? Yeah? Yeah. Just the 48% of us then. 23 after 12 is the time. That's one of the stories involving food that caught my eye this morning. The other one is altogether grimmer. It is the food bank story. It is the fact that food banks are now fearful of running out of grub. The simple question of what is going to happen. But let's start with what is happening. 12:23 is the time. As either a food bank user or a food bank worker, and some people I appreciate have been in both categories over the years, what's going on? We've got to do this. You know that, don't you? What's going on? What is happening on the shelves, for example, the stuff that is not coming in? Because, of course, food bank usage is a consequence of cost of living, even when there isn't a cost of living crisis. In fact, thinking about it now and listening to those words emerge from my gob, if food banks exist, there's a cost of living crisis, right? Full stop. Or of course, a cause for celebration and feeling uplifted, as Jacob Rees-Mogg would argue. But if a food bank exists, there's a cost of living crisis. So what we're talking about now is not a cost of living crisis. It's just a bigger cost of living crisis than the one we already had. There are more food banks in the UK than there are branches of McDonald's. Did you know that? Because they don't have big illuminated signs outside or drive-throughs. You may not have noticed. They're often sort of nestled away around the back of a church or something like that. More McDonald's, more food banks than McDonald's. So there's a cost of living crisis already. There was a cost of living crisis long before the cost of living crisis started appearing in our conversations every day. The minute that food banks began to proliferate, I can see the need perhaps for a small number of them in limited and specific circumstances. And there were food banks around under the Labour government, a fraction of what there is now, but it's not helpful to pretend otherwise. But when the more food banks proliferate, the bigger the cost of living crisis clearly is. It's only a cost of living crisis, though, in the eyes of politicians and most of the media, perhaps, when it extends into areas that we don't traditionally accept or expect to be hungry. You know that line in the Bible that people pretend, or actually I think they genuinely don't understand it, the poor will always be with us, which some right-wingers take as a sort of reason not to try to alleviate poverty. Well, there's no point, the poor will always be with us. The rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate, God made us high and lowly and ordered their estate. It's all there, but it becomes a cost of living. We might do that actually later in the week if I've got the energy. When does it actually become a cost of living crisis? If you've got more food banks in these islands than you have branches of McDonald's, how come it wasn't already a cost of living crisis? Answer, because it wasn't affecting people who never expect to be affected. And that's a movable line. It's a perforated line. It's not a movable feast. I should probably check that McDonald's line. I'm 99% sure it's true because we've said it before, but let me just double check in case I've got that wrong. So you've got this combination of cost of living affecting not just people who may have recourse to using a food bank, but also, of course, affecting people who may, and we spoke to lovely Emma yesterday in Wilmington, I think it was, who actually used the word guilty. That was the call. Every day there's a call, more than others sometimes, that I take away from the show. And it was the idea of Emma feeling guilty that upset me yesterday. Upset me because she's feeling guilty that she can't help more. How guilty do you think Jacob Rees-Mogg feels about the state of his local food? He feels uplifted by his local food bank. Emma, who is by no means rich but manages to find a few quid to buy stuff to give to her local food bank and now worries that she's not going to be able to because of her own cost of living, she feels guilty that she can't help her local food bank, while Jacob Rees-Mogg feels uplifted that people like Emma exist. And there's British politics for you in a blooming nutshell. So let's just do a snapshot. What's going on? What's going on in the food banks? 0345 606 0973. I have to warn you that for the last month or so, every time we've turned our attention to an issue like this, we've unearthed pretty grim findings, which then 2-3 weeks later have started appearing on the rest of the national news. You know, we were talking about the absence of price caps on businesses, on business tariffs about a month ago. Talking about fish and chip shops originally, but then about everything else, and that's moved on. It'll be hospitals and schools next. They expect that to become big news in the next week or two. So we are. It's no fun being this particular canary down that particular coal mine, but it's happening, isn't it? Every time we do it, we sit here and we hear from real people about what's happening in the real world, the world where no one gives a fig about woke policing. And we get a little bit spooked. We get a little bit scared. We get a little bit worried. And then we think, it can't be that bad because no one else is reporting it. And then 2, 3, 4 weeks later, everyone else is reporting it. And thankfully, people begin to get a little bit worried. And the politicians continue to do absolutely nothing about it because they're having their 7,000th hustings tomorrow or tonight. 28 minutes after 12 is the time. You work in a food bank, or you volunteer in a food bank, or you use a food bank. I appreciate it's harder sometimes to call me if you're in the second category. We do ring everybody straight back, but it's not something you necessarily want to shout from the rooftops, which is part of the problem, of course, when people need help but don't ask for it. What's going on? Hit the numbers now. You will get through, and I mean that because it's 12:30 already, and so the rhythm of the show has been a little bit off kilter today. So if you, I know I say it a lot, and sometimes it's not true, but if you hit the numbers now, you will get through. But I need an inside view. I need a snapshot. what's going on in food banks, and that question that is popping up on a daily basis now, regardless of what issue it is we're actually addressing. How bad is it? 0345 6060 973. And as OJ asks, a very pertinent question, what's going to happen with your energy bills in your food banks? I presume it's going to be duffel coats and bobble hats, is it? Let's find out. The number you need, 0345 6060 973. Tim Humphrey is here now with your headlines. It is 12:32, and if the cost of food is going up, then the amount of and the cost of living is going up, energy bills are biting, then those of us who give to food banks are going to diminish. Our numbers are going to diminish. And yet the people who need food banks their numbers are going to increase. So what does reality look like right now? And what does the future look like? What are you fearful about? I presume there'd be no heating on in these places because you couldn't have. I mean, that would just be an obvious saving to make, but it makes volunteering there harder as well. Anything you've got to tell me, really, because I think this is one of those days when I pass my plate around looking for information. It always reminds me, as many things do, like about the Clement Attlee quote, charity is a cold, grey, loveless thing. If a rich man wants to help the poor, he should pay his taxes gladly, not dole out money at a whim. Food banks are charity, but it's not a rich man's charity, generally speaking. Jacob Rees-Mogg, for example, doesn't dole out his money. Well, maybe he does. Maybe he funds several food banks, but he finds them uplifting. It's not. It's a cold, grey, loveless thing that society should be addressing, but doesn't. So what is going on the ground in food banks? 12:34. Mary Grace is in Fife. Mary Grace, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I'm not actually going to talk about food banks as such, but clothing banks.
Okay.
We've heard about food banks and we've started to hear about heat banks as well this week. I actually
I've got some more on that in a minute. When I say goodbye to you, remind me to talk about the warm banks.
I will do. But I actually run with my husband and a few friends a clothing bank in Dunfermline, and we cover one particular area of Fife. And we started up about 2 years ago during the COVID pandemic because there was an added pressure on families at that point. And what we've seen this year is an increase in the referrals that come to our service. We run it as a charity. We're a registered charity. We're all volunteers that run it.
Yes.
And we have seen an increase in 27% in referrals this year.
God,
so in the last 12 months...
27% already?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wowza.
So in the last 12 months, we have issued 407 clothing parcels, and that's to 407 children in 12 months in the last year. And that's only in a small part of Fife. That's in the Dunfermline area and some surrounding areas. And that's an increase from last year when it was like 222 parcels we did.
What is this pincer movement going to feel like when you have increased demand and I presume decreased donation? Although because people are going to be less likely to buy new clothes, which means they're going to be less likely to be able to send you their old clothes, right?
Yeah. Our annual running clothes costs at the moment are about £11,000, and that money that's because we sometimes provide clothing vouchers because the clothes we provide are for children from birth right the way up to 18 years old. And for our teenagers, rather than providing clothing parcels, we provide a few items of clothing, but we provide like clothing vouchers for a shop so they can go and choose their own clothes to try and give them a bit of self-esteem as well, so they're not feeling they're just getting charity.
Yes, of course.
So there are some overheads, but we're very fortunate that the majority of our spend is on the donations that go out the door. We have our premises, the use of our premises free of charge from a local business. They give us free. It's a shop front that we've got, and they let us use that free of charge. So we have no rent costs. We do have the only costs we do have are our energy, our electric, and our energy costs there. So I don't know how that's going to impact on us. We don't have any heating in the premises anyway, but I don't know how that's going to impact on our actual overall costs. But you're right that in terms of donations we receive, we will probably see a drop-off in that.
What explains it, do you think? Is it out of sight, out of mind? And you know, people like you step up to the plate and do what is both right and needed, but it shouldn't be down to you. People shouldn't be in need of this sort of support, should they?
I know, and I don't know what the answer is. And you're right, we feel a lot of pride in what we do because we're providing families with support. It's difficult to step forward and say you need help. It's really difficult to reach out and ask for that help, and to be able to offer that to families in that situation. We do it anonymously as well, so it's all done through a referral system. So we don't know any details of the family. We don't know their names. We don't know where they live. We know nothing about them. The referrals come to us from like health visitors or social workers or another practitioner who's working with the family. And we felt that was quite important as well, because I've got kids at school myself. So I then wouldn't want any of the families who I speak to at the school gates not reaching out for help because they know I run the service.
I wonder how big a deal that is. I mean, you have to be careful what I share on air with some of the stuff that's sent to me, because I've got no means of checking whether or not it's true. But older people in particular finding it almost impossible to acknowledge that they need help, and being found in some cases in pretty grim circumstances, pretty heartbreaking circumstances is the easiest thing to say. But kids without clothes, of course, is heartbreaking as well. And it's because, I'm not to state the bleeding obvious, Mary Grace, but you can't wear the clothes you wore last year if you're a kid, can you? Because you're a foot taller.
You can. And this is our most busiest time of year coming in now, because obviously you can make do with clothes over the summer when it's warmer, but when you come into the winter months and it gets colder, particularly in Scotland, you need new clothes. And what we provide as part of the clothing parcel is like a week's worth of clothing, right down to underwear and to a coat, like a winter coat. So it's a full...
How can people support you? I mean, it's such powerful work that you do, albeit that you're chipping away at an enormous coalface. How can people find out more about what you're doing?
Well, we do. We have like a Facebook page, Children's Clothing Bank in Dunfermline. We have a Facebook page, and we do have like a Just Giving page as well. I think it's Crowdfunder and Crowdfunder. So we do
Children's Clothing Bank Dunfermline. If you Google that, you'll find what you need to find.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Now, what was your job now at the end of the conversation?
Well, I do this in my spare time. I work for the NHS.
No, you're supposed to remind me of something, Mary Grace. I told you to.
Oh, sorry.
Honestly, I can't do everything myself. It's 20 to 1. You know I get tired in the third hour of the programme, Mary Grace. Yes, warm banks, heat banks, whatever we're going to call them. Thank you. And thank you for everything you do, the Dunfermline Children's Clothes Banks. Now, here's a story that yesterday we did a lot on warm banks. I did something I don't very often do. I did something I never do this morning. I said, how can anybody be so stupid as to fall for this? Didn't really work. That wasn't really the question that got you ringing in to talk to me on the question of woke policing, I suppose, for slightly obvious reasons when you think about it. But yesterday... It just that question of how do you feel about this when we talk about being in a country that is supposedly wealthy, a country that's just seen the chief executives of the 100 biggest companies record an average 39% pay rise, a country that is, or a population that was assured that by voting to leave the largest single market in the history of humanity, we'd somehow end up better off than them. All of these factors coming into play. And then we read yesterday about a proliferation of preparation for warm banks. Councils looking to use libraries. The Tories have shut 800. Councils looking to use libraries and possibly museums to provide spaces where cold people can go to warm up for a while. Guess what the follow-up is today? In Boris Johnson's Brexit Britain. Well, he is on a lap of honour, celebrating his legacy and achievements. Museums are warning that they will struggle to provide warm banks for people priced out of heating their homes because the institution's own soaring bills threaten closures and restrictions on opening this winter. That's 24 hours in the news site. That's 24 hours in Boris Johnson's Brexit Britain. Yesterday, oh my God! They're talking about using museums as warm banks because people who are lucky enough to be able to get around, which is going to exclude a lot of the most vulnerable, are so unable to heat their own homes that councils now are making preparations to provide them with spaces where they can simply go and keep warm, spaces that include museums. Fast forward 24 hours, the Museums Association warned yesterday that the cost of living crisis risked being a bigger blow to the sector than the pandemic, with many museum directors in despair about how to pay for energy bills rises of up to 500%. I know I'm labouring this point a bit at the moment, but I have to reassure myself sometimes. When something pops up on the show and I think, that can't be right, that's awful, and then it turns out to be right. We've got to keep hitting those marks, otherwise we'll get nervous. So when people started telling me public buildings, schools, hospitals, in this case museums, are going to be hit with price rises on their energy bills that's going to make the domestic market look like a picnic, I thought they must be getting something wrong. As ever, or as usual, you weren't. Ashley's in Ashford. Ashley, what can you tell me? Ashley! 12:42 is the time. Something wrong with Ashley. So that was the story that really put me backwards, if you like, this morning. The idea that yesterday we were bemoaning the need for warm banks, and today we're learning that one of the sectors charged with providing them doesn't think it's going to be able to. Let's go to Croydon. Marcus is there. Marcus, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James.
Hello.
I work for a charity called the Felix Project, and we're right at the forefront getting good food to people out there. And we found we're getting less food coming in from our suppliers, and we're having much higher costs with transport costs trying to collect the food.
Your suppliers, have we spoken before?
No, we haven't.
Have we not? Are your suppliers, maybe I might be getting mixed up, are your suppliers more businesses than individuals?
No, we work with like Ocado, Sainsbury's.
Yeah, that's what I mean. You take the
yeah.
food from businesses and then you distribute it. It's not members of the public that are dropping stuff off at the depot, is it?
No, exactly. Yeah, it's from businesses, James. Yeah.
Okay, so what's going on then?
Yeah, so at the moment we're getting less food coming in, and like we've still got like a waiting list of 170 charities trying to get food from us, and we're just trying to do more kind of thing. Sometimes we have to like spend to get a bit of food in to try and make sure we've got enough to help the charities.
I think I've spoken to one of your colleagues. I'm familiar with this model.
Okay.
What do you think explains why supermarkets have got less food to give you? Because it's food that is it going to be linked to the other story about best before dates?
No. So we get all the things that's gone past the best before dates.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. If there's no best before dates anymore, then they're going to have less food to give you, aren't they? Or not?
Exactly. Yeah. I think exactly because they're going to be selling the things for a longer shelf life.
Yes.
There'll be more less food coming to charity. Exactly. Yeah.
Oh boy. So when they talk about tons of food waste being thrown away, what we don't know is how much of that might be making its way to an organisation like yours.
Yeah, no, exactly, James. The one thing you said earlier on was about what are wealthy people doing to try and combat the cost of living crisis. So we were founded by a guy called Justin Byneshaw, who's an entrepreneur, and he set the Felix Project up to try and help people in memory of his son. And since he's done that, we've been helping nearly 30 million meals a year for people in London. And it's just going to show there are people out there that's powerful business people like Justin.
Yes.
That actually use his personal wealth and all of his contacts to try and make a difference for other people. I think it's really inspiring. We need more people like that in society trying to use what they've got to help others, and we could really get to grips with it.
I'm not going to argue with you, but and Justin sounds like a stand-up guy, but my personal position is we need to construct, and you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, but I want to help construct a society in which you don't need organisations like yours because people aren't going hungry.
Ideal world, exactly,
I know we all do. That's the mystery. Yeah. That's the mystery, isn't it? How worried are you about?
It wouldn't be needed, would we? You're right.
No,
yeah,
exactly. How worried are you about what's on the horizon? Because I presume it's a pretty squeaky business at the best of times. And now
we're quite worried because we've got that big waiting list, and one of the things we do is work with lots of primary schools in central London. So we work with 1,000 charities, community organisations, and primary schools. And I saw this thing online this morning about one of the dinner ladies from a school turning children away.
Yes,
that's something we're very passionate about. We provide food to holiday programs to make sure children don't go hungry during the summer holidays. And I just think it's shocking, really, that any child should be turned away from having a meal at school. It's completely unacceptable, and that needs to come from the top down, doesn't it, from the government?
You'd think so, except, of course, when Marcus Rashford got on that particular campaign, some people were very upset about it, by which I mean Downing Street. The idea that children going hungry in the school holidays because the financial situation of their parents doesn't change. They can't afford school dinners in term time. They can't afford dinners in holiday time either. But these conversations are surreal. And I say that from a position of epic privilege. Please don't never think I'm not aware of that. But to me, they're surreal to be living in this country and to be talking about the kind of issues that Marcus refers to. 12:46 is the time. 12:49 is the time. Before we get back to the food banks conversation, I just want to share this with you because there are two stories today with Rwanda in the headline. And I think that little breakthrough we made earlier about why politicians are so dedicated to stoking up these largely racist policies, it means they end up doing really stupid things. So there are two stories here that I want you to think about because this is what you are being told that you support. This is what people like Priti Patel think that you want to see. Story number 1. Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, pushed ahead with the Rwanda policy despite being warned that migrants faced a significant risk of modern slavery. So you go back to 2018, Rwanda had double the global average rate of victims. That's even higher than the average rate in sub-Saharan Africa. They also flagged, this will be civil servants, perhaps you need a bit of a reminder on the government's attempt to demonise civil servants at the moment. They're like woke lawyers. UK government officials also flagged a 2020 report by the US State Department that found there had been an increase in domestic trafficking in Rwanda during the pandemic. So the country to which Priti Patel is desperate to deport profoundly vulnerable people who will have no safety nets or support networks in place in Rwanda, they won't know anybody there, is a country where the incidence of trafficking and modern slavery is higher than almost anywhere else in the world, or certainly more than double the global average. The Times has also been told that a separate internal Home Office document contained the advice from officials that contradicted the minister's claims that the Rwanda policy would reduce the exploitation of migrants. So the experts, looking at the evidence, are saying it will have the opposite effect to what the politicians, looking at the tabloids, are telling you. But it gets worse. Former residents of a hostel in Rwanda, themselves survivors of genocide, have been essentially evicted. They've been forced to leave the property as a consequence of this deal that Priti Patel has negotiated, the £120 million that she's paid to Rwanda to house people arriving in the UK by small boats, all of whom may well prove to be completely genuine refugees, completely genuine asylum seekers, but they're all going to Rwanda, and if their applications are genuine, they're staying there. The beds they will sleep in have been vacated by survivors of the Rwandan genocide. They've been living in this hostel for up to 8 years, but they've been told to vacate. They were told to get out 2 days after Priti Patel signed that agreement. Some have told journalists they've lost their families in the genocide and had nowhere else to go. A timely reminder, perhaps, that the UK government has so far failed to send a single asylum seeker to Rwanda. And remember, if you're going, well, they should bloody well hurry up then you're calling for them to be sent to a place where they're twice as likely to become a victim of slavery as the global average. So, go you, eh? 12:53 is the time. Back to the food banks. Akil is in Peterborough. Akil, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
I was just listening to the show and I just felt compelled to call in. So I manage a charity called I Care Peterborough. And one of our services is a food bank. We've been going since January last year. We've provided roughly around about 8 tons of fresh food items to people across the city, as well as about 3,500-4,000 hot meals as well.
Where does it come from, the fresh food? Because that's not going to be public donations, is it?
No. So we have relationships with Fair Share, so we have access to supermarket food. So I just listened to the previous caller as well.
You're doing a similar thing. You're doing a similar thing to the Phoenix Project, I think.
But what we've noticed, though, is there is still a lot of food available right across the city from different supermarkets as well. And where we're quite different to other food banks is that we don't have a place for someone to walk in to come and collect the food. We actually go and deliver it across the community ourselves.
Right.
And we have large, as you mentioned before about elderly people, there's so many different types of people who need help from all different types of backgrounds. And what we've noticed is that the desperation behind the first element you see is the food, but behind that is the actual poverty, fuel poverty. There could be abuse and things like that behind that. And this is what you don't see.
Yeah.
You just see somebody get in touch with you via social media or whatever it may be, and they'll say, look, we need some food. And then as that befriending place takes place, James, you realise, hold on, this person needs any additional help. And we're living in such a scary time where people can't even imagine the topping they want on a pizza, let alone buy the pizza,
I do. And there's no light at the end of the tunnel at the moment, is there? I mean, genuinely, no. I mean, the idea that Liz Truss is going to arrive in Downing Street and come up with solutions to some of these problems is almost certainly pie in the sky, but it won't include these problems. The bit I don't quite understand, and maybe this isn't your experience, and we got possibly close to an understanding with the last lad, why would your if your donations don't depend upon the public, why would they be going down?
So what we've noticed is that there is people have become more, aware of when the supermarket's going to be dropping their prices. So they'll go to the store, they'll buy that food cheap. But we haven't, fortunately, we've got such good relationships with the supermarkets directly now. We have a certain portion they leave for us. But where the other element of what we have is we've actually got to know a lot of the local businesses, so they're also donating. And we have a lot of the public who we have a big team of cooks. So every other Saturday, we self-fund hot meals, so we provide hundreds of hot meals every month to people across the city from all kinds of dishes. I'm sure you'd like some curry, James. We supply everything from samosas all the way down to pastas and things like that as well. So we have two elements to it, as well as clothes. What we've noticed is there's a lot of children, like you mentioned, no one wants to wear the same uniform.
No,
so there's a real demand for clothing as well. So we've supplied, I think it's something like 5,000 pieces of clothing as well. And it just carries on, week in, week out. Our teams are out every night almost, and we're trying to help people as best as we can. It's all about taking care of your own community at the end of the day, and that's everyone included in the community. But going back to what you were just saying about Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, they're so far away from reality. You wouldn't believe it. I mean, they wouldn't even walk down these streets, let alone even think about these people.
No, and I don't know how that works, although I'm coming to a clearer conclusion that it's out of sight, out of mind. And then, of course, the question of blame, that's when it becomes a cost of living crisis, rhetorically speaking or journalistically speaking. I think Akhil's just clarified that for me. It's when you cannot blame the people who are in trouble for being in trouble. So single mothers, unemployed people, flat screen TVs. But when it's people who usually look a bit like you, their lives sound a bit like yours, that's when the media can no longer claim or can no longer claim that it's somehow the deserving poor as opposed to the undeserving poor. That's when it becomes a cost of living crisis, when it starts affecting people who usually have enough money to buy a newspaper every day. Tony's in Manchester. I can only give you a minute, Tony. What's it going to be?
Well, singing from the same hymn sheet as everyone else, really.
But you're in a food bank rather than one that is funded, that is supplied by businesses and shops.
Yeah, so since the 1st of June, I've pulled up slight research, nothing like your caller from the other day, but since the 1st of June this year, we've given out 12,214 kilograms worth of food and taken in donations 5,999. So it's literally half of what we've got coming in. We were lucky in the sense of COVID, which sounds crass, but we were, because donations were coming in from a lot of businesses and everyone was a lot more altruistic during COVID and trying to help out, whereas now things are drying up and the stockpile's kind of going down, and we're looking down the line to say, as trustees as well, what can we do? So
what can you do?
Well, that's been the debate at the last few trustees meetings of how we're going to manage this decline in donations coming in. So we're going out, like the last caller was saying, contacting a lot of businesses, see if we can get anything coming in from them. But
so you have to start getting proactive, because you're going to have more demand than your supply can meet.
Pretty much, and as I say, corporations are feeling the cost of living just as much as individuals are, so their donations are drying up as well. So do we, have to turn people away, ration what we give out? These are all debates that we've now got to start having, because we want to continue to feed the community, and we have to, because that's what we're here for. But at the same time, are we going to have to say, well, we can only do 100 this week and 100 next week, and make sure it's a different 100 people?
Imagine getting that message. That was, sorry, we can't help you this week. And I imagine it's going to be hard for you. It's going to take a toll on your mental health, Tony, and your fellow trustees. And there's no... Well, maybe Liz Truss is the answer to all the problems that we find ourselves addressing on the programme every day at the moment. Maybe. It is 12:59. Sangeeta Maiska is next. 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 Sangeeta Maiska.
Bầu trời chiều không màu nắng ấm, thầm thầm buồn vọng nhớ về đường. phương trời xa, ai nào hay biết.